History is often written in the ink of progress, but some chapters are etched in the deep, silent shadows of memory. To understand the winter of 1937 is to look into a mirror of human endurance and unfathomable loss. Once the flourishing heart of a nation, the capital of China stood on the precipice of a transformation that would scar the collective conscience of the world forever. This is not just a story of a city's fall, but of the light that flickered in its darkest corners. December 1937. The air in Nanking grew cold, not just from the frost, but from the approaching thunder of a conflict that had already consumed Shanghai. The Second Sino-Japanese War had arrived at the city's massive, ancient gates. For months, the resistance in Shanghai had been fierce, but the eventual retreat left the path to Nanking open. As the defensive lines crumbled, a sense of impending doom settled over the streets that once bustled with life and commerce.
The government had moved inland to Chongqing. Those left behind were the poor, the elderly, and those who simply had nowhere else to go. The city was a shell, waiting for the storm to break.
On December 9th, the ultimatum was issued. Surrender or face total destruction. The defenders refused. By the 13th, the walls, some of the thickest in the world, were breached. The capital had fallen. The defending forces attempted a desperate final stand, but communication lines were already hopelessly severed across the sprawling districts.
Orders to retreat were confused and contradictory, sparking a disorganized rush toward the northern gates of the city.
Civilians and soldiers alike became trapped in a terrifying bottleneck of sheer desperation as the perimeter collapsed inward.
The Yangtze River, normally the lifeblood of the capital, became an impassable barrier as transport boats were destroyed.
Makeshift rafts, lashed together in panic, capsized under the immense weight of thousands attempting to flee the burning capital.
The sky was entirely black with smoke. One international journalist recorded. The winter sun was completely extinguished by midday.
Avenues once lined with vibrant silk merchants were now choked with abandoned vehicles and the debris of a broken army.
As night fell on the 13th, the remaining defenders shed their uniforms, desperately attempting to blend into the civilian populace.
The heavy silence that immediately followed the artillery bombardment was, to many, more terrifying than the explosions themselves.
The gates were open. The vanguard of the occupation marched unopposed into a paralyzed, trembling metropolis.
What followed over the next 6 weeks was a period of systemic collapse that defied modern military convention. The city became a labyrinth of fear, where the basic protections of international law seemed to vanish in the smoke of burning districts.
Dr. Robert Wilson, a dedicated surgeon at the university hospital, watched the occupation begin from his darkened window. The streets are entirely desolate. He typed frantically in his diary. We are bracing ourselves for the absolute worst.
The initial wave of occupation brought widespread destruction, tearing through shops and private homes with systemic ruthlessness.
We are utterly cut off, wrote another committee member. The telegraph lines are dead. The world has gone silent.
The international observers knew they had hours, not days, to establish a perimeter of safety for the trapped civilians. In the midst of this chaos, a small group of foreign nationals, businessmen, doctors, and missionaries, refused to leave. They recognized that without a neutral ground, the civilian population would have no sanctuary. They formed the International Committee for the Nanking Safety Zone. Their goal was simple but nearly impossible, to create a 2-square-mile neutral territory to house the city's remaining refugees.
John Rabe, a German businessman and leader of the local Nazi Party branch, was elected chairman. It is one of history's most profound ironies that his credentials provided him the only leverage to stand against the tide of the occupation. Rabe wrote in his diary, "We foreigners are the only ones who can do anything. We must try to save these people, even if it costs us our lives. There is no other way."
Rabe's own residential compound on Guangzhou Road quickly became the frantic nervous system of the entire humanitarian effort.
We are working day and night without pause, Rabe noted. Sleep is a luxury we simply cannot afford right now.
He frantically drafted telegrams directly to Berlin, hoping his political affiliation might sway the invading high command.
I cannot believe my own government will ignore this desperate plea for basic humanity, he wrote into the night.
But the appeals fell on deaf ears across the globe. The makeshift committee realized they were entirely on their own.
Rabe personally patrolled the unmarked borders of the zone, carrying nothing to protect himself but a simple walking stick.
I showed them my armband. They hesitated, glared, but eventually turned away. For now, it holds them back.
Every passing hour brought new crises. The safety zone was a fragile fiction, held together purely by diplomatic bluffing.
They painstakingly marked out an area incorporating Nanking University, government buildings, and several abandoned foreign embassies.
We have drawn a desperate line in the dust, Rabe stated. We must pray they decide to respect it.
At Jinling College, Minnie Vautrin, an American educator known to the locals as the Goddess of Mercy, opened the gates to thousands of women and children. She stood at the entrance day and night, a solitary figure protecting her charges.
Her journal entries reveal the weight of her mission. She wrote, "There are times when my heart feels it will break. But then I see the faces of these children, and I know I cannot leave them."
Jinling College quickly became a sanctuary specifically designed to shield the city's most vulnerable population from the outside terror.
They come to us in tears, begging for just a corner to sleep in, Vautrin recorded with heavy sadness.
The campus buildings were filled to the rafters. Every classroom, hallway, and basement became a densely crowded dormitory.
I have placed them in the attics, the cellars, even the chapel. Still, more arrive every single hour.
Vautrin relentlessly patrolled the campus grounds at night, a solitary flashlight piercing the thick, terrifying gloom of the occupation.
I hear heavy footsteps near the walls. I shout into the dark. Sometimes, thankfully, they choose to retreat.
The psychological toll of constantly standing between her refugees and armed military patrols was an immeasurable, exhausting burden.
I am so tired I can barely hold my pen. But I must keep watch. I must stay awake.
She physically faced down officers at the front gate, fiercely demanding they respect the American flag flying above.
Her sheer, unwavering willpower effectively turned the iron gates of Jinling into an impenetrable psychological barrier.
The safety zone was intended for 30,000 people. Within days, over 200,000 had crowded into its boundaries. Food was scarce, medicine was non-existent, and the borders of the zone were under constant threat.
The massive logistics of basic survival quickly became the International Committee's most terrifying and relentless adversary.
We have no coal left, no electricity, and the municipal water pumps have completely stopped working, Rabe worried.
Volunteers scoured abandoned warehouses, bravely securing hidden stockpiles of rice and flour under the dangerous cover of night.
Meals were drastically reduced to a thin gruel, served just once a day to shivering, hungry thousands.
Dr. Wilson operated around the clock without electricity, relying solely on kerosene lamps and his own sheer endurance. We are entirely out of bandages, out of ether. We are forced to use torn bedsheets.
Heavy winter rains turned the overcrowded courtyards into freezing, impassable expanses of thick mud and absolute despair.
Basic sanitation completely collapsed. The terrifying threat of cholera and typhoid loomed over the densely packed refugee camps.
If the soldiers do not break our fragile zone, the freezing winter surely will, Rabe wrote grimly.
Yet, through miraculous, strict rationing and iron discipline, the committee somehow managed to keep the refugees alive. Rabe and his colleagues used whatever they had to mark the zone. They draped large flags over buildings and vehicles, hoping that the international symbols would command a respect that the city's walls no longer could.
Daily survival meant constantly confronting heavily armed patrols attempting to breach the zone's incredibly fragile borders.
They loudly demanded to enter the hospital wards. I stood in the doorway and simply said no.
The foreign nationals frequently used their own bodies as shields, bravely interposing themselves between invading soldiers and civilians.
I was struck across the face today, Vautrin wrote. But I did not move an inch from the entrance.
It was an agonizing, terrifying game of diplomatic brinkmanship, played out a dozen times a single day.
We smile, we bow, we show them our passports. We carefully hide our violently trembling hands.
The nights were always the hardest. The zone plunged into pitch darkness, haunted by distant, terrifying screams.
We sit in the cold dark and pray that the morning comes quickly. Dr. Wilson recorded.
Every single sunrise that the safety zone survived felt like an impossible, fleeting miracle of human willpower.
The astonishing courage of these few individuals held back a relentless tide of absolute destruction.
The tragedy of Nanking is often quantified in numbers, but the true scale is found in the individual stories of those who survived and those who did not. The city became a landscape of profound mourning.
Even as the occupation tightened its grip, the members of the International Committee worked tirelessly to document what they saw. They sent letters to embassies and hid film reels, ensuring that the truth would eventually reach the outside world.
By February 1938, the worst of the violence began to subside as international pressure mounted and the military administration changed. But the Nanking that emerged was a city changed forever, a place of ghosts and ruins.
The aftermath was a long road of recovery and reckoning. In the post-war years, the world began to piece together the evidence of those 6 weeks. The Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal brought some measure of legal accountability, but the emotional wounds remained open.
For decades, the story of Nanking was often overshadowed by the broader narratives of World War II. But in the hearts of the survivors and their descendants, the memory was kept alive, a flame that refused to be extinguished.
Today, the Memorial Hall of the Victims in Nanjing stands as a somber reminder. It is a place of silence, of education, and of an enduring vow, never again.
We remember Nanking not to harbor bitterness, but to honor the dignity of the human spirit. We remember the bravery of the foreigners who stayed, the resilience of the citizens who endured, and the fragility of peace.
History is a teacher, and its lessons are often painful. But in the shadow of Nanjing, we find the ultimate truth that even in the absence of light, humanity can still find a way to shine. As the sun sets over the Yangtze today, the city stands rebuilt, a testament to the power of renewal. But the past is never truly gone. It remains in the stone, in the water, and in the stories we tell. May we never forget the winter of 1937. May we always strive for a world where such a chapter is never written again. Peace is the only path forward.